Many people have asked me to create a video concerning my recent rejection of Sedevacantism. Given the fact that I was so vocal in defense of Sedevacantism, I believe it only fitting that I give at least a few of my reasons for rejecting it here. But let me first admit that this is not meant to be a comprehensive list of my reasons for rejecting Sedevacantism. I became convinced that Sedevacantism is, at the root, theologically anarchistic. Sedevacantism is radically autonomous. This is especially true theologically. While there is a degree of truth to the idea that laypersons have the right and responsibility to understand the faith, it is something altogether different for a layperson to presume the rights and responsibilities properly entrusted to the hierarchy. This leads to divisions over matters not at all trivial. But the problem isn't so much that differences exist, for differences of opinion are rampant among those in communion with Rome. Rather, the contention must focus on the most basic and ruling hermeneutical assumptions held by Sedevacantists. It must not merely point to the fact that it is horribly anti-hierarchical, but that their hermeneutic is, at its core, relativistic, without any internal mechanisms by which any given conclusion may be considered binding or even settled authoritatively. I became convinced that Sedevacantism is rooted in and inevitably leads to ecclesiastical anarchy. The ecclesiastical nature of Sedevacantism is rogue. Bishops go where they wish, sending priests where they wish, all as they see fit. Worst yet, bishops and priests lacking ordinary jurisdiction have little more to offer than opinions lacking any binding force upon the faithful. Their opinion may be accepted, it may be rejected, and is done so at will. This doesn't mean that these bishops and priests do not, on occasion, act in a way consistent only with ordinary jurisdiction. In fact, they do, and many laypersons treat their word as they would were these bishops to actually have ordinary jurisdiction. Bumping heads with the bishops may be taboo, but a consensus amongst those who happen to agree on bishops and opinions is, in itself, nothing more than agreeing on those particular bishops and their opinions. Given the theological and ecclesiastical presuppositions of Sedevacantism, this actually amounts to very little. One may argue, given the nature of the situation, that opinions connected with the cloth mean nothing at all. It doesn't take long before one notices a dramatic laicization of the church. Sedevacantism, in many ways, is anti-hierarchical. Lay people take on functions always having been reserved for the hierarchy and for those qualified for such tasks. By a kind of assumed necessity, they become laws unto themselves. Most have never been trained in church history, dogmatic theology, moral theology, scripture, canon law, asceticism, or philosophy, yet they speak and act as though they were. With a few verses, a few laws, and a handful of books, they fill the hierarchical void resulting from their theological opinions. Their interpretation and application of Paul IV's cum ex leads down a road even the most individualistic Sedevacantists wouldn't want to travel. Most Sedevacantists are relatively familiar with Paul IV's cum ex, but normally only parts of it. It is here where Sedevacantist autonomy is at its strongest. They will argue that no hierarchical decision should come into play when dealing with those they insist are heretical popes, given that such men are judged ipso facto without any need of further decree. But most would argue that these claimants were invalid even prior to their election, and this is where things get tough for the Sedevacantist. The Church has not been silent concerning these things. In fact, the 1917 Code of Canon Law seems to place such decisions in the hands of the popes, specifically when dealing with the cardinals eligible to actively and passively take part in conclave. Canon 1557, paragraph 1 and 2, says, quote, "It belongs entirely to the Roman pontiff to judge cardinal fathers, cardinal priests," end quote. Canon 1558 adds to this by saying, quote, "In the causes of which Canon 1556, 1557 treat, the incompetence of any other judge is absolute," end quote. So the Roman pontiff is the sole judge, and the incompetence of any other judge is absolute, period. The issue at stake is not so much whether claimants can publicly defect from the faith, but how such is to be decided, declared, and acted upon. In short, when it comes to the putative heresy of a cardinal, the Church has declared that it is the Pope, and to him alone, who has the right and authority to determine whether divine law has been violated by a cardinal or Pope, and what's to be done. Furthermore, Pope St. Pius X and Pius XII issued legislation concerning conclave that appears to be at odds with the Sedevacantist thesis. According to the legislation, cardinals were permitted to take both active and passive roles in conclave, regardless of, quote, any excommunication whatsoever, end quote. As the list of considered exceptions signifies, these were formal sentences imposed upon cardinals by valid ecclesiastical authorities. But what does this actually prove? Simply put, formal sentences, such as excommunication, solidify already existing spiritual realities. If they are formally excommunicated, it is on account of something that had already, in reality, severed them from the visible church. In short, heresy, schism, and apostasy sever one from the church, and excommunication is proof positive. But if one may have endured formal excommunication or similar censures and still be eligible to actively and passively take part in conclave, how much more one that had not undergone formal excommunication? I was also forced to reflect upon how the Sedevacantist thesis works in relation to the common good of Catholics, individually, and the Church as a whole, both now and in history. Consider for a moment the logical end of the Sedevacantist claim. Given the theological and ecclesiastical autonomy of Sedevacantism, any and all agreements are rooted more in convention than in necessity. The Sedevacantist standard could be drawn upon by any and all heretics in human history. An Arian could argue that the Catholic Church fell into heresy, and that the popes, insofar as they have embraced Trinitarianism, have fallen ipso facto, without any need of further decree. Surely the Arians would have a greater case, as there were far more Arians than there currently are Sedevacantists. Such would be true not only before the Church decided on the matter, but also after, even up to our present day. And if time elapsed is of no significance, then there is a hill of beans difference between 50 years and 1,685 years. At issue, then, is not so much whether or not Sedevacantists would agree with such a scenario. Of course they wouldn't. What is at issue here is the fact that their most basic and ruling presuppositions could be invoked by any heretical sect in Catholic history. Then there's the issue of all things doubtful being treated as practical certainties. Sedevacantists generally treat many matters as mere opinions, but they rarely think, speak, or even act in such a way. It is very much a matter of certainty. This is true not only of the validity of recent claimants, but also in regards to things like eschatology. Most insist that Sedevacantism is little more than a thesis that cannot be settled on the authority of the layperson. Putting this to a test shows something quite different. Anyone who may have formerly been a Sedevacantist can explain this rather well. Question the thesis, you're in danger. Reject the thesis, you are a modernist heretic, an apostate of bad will, and possibly even an apologist for the Antichrist. The theological opinion is, functionally speaking, an article of faith. Lastly, concerning things doubtful. Doubtful things must be avoided, hence Sedevacantist refusal to even go to the FSSP parishes. But very few consider the possibility that their position is doubtful. They insist that it is doubtful that the claimant is the Pope or that the priests are valid, yet they don't consider that the same doubt and even a greater doubt may be held concerning their competence, or that it may be doubtful that even in such a case that it would be wise or good to go on to unauthorized chapels with rogue priests and bishops. As such may be said of most any position they hold, and definitely insofar as their reaction to the situation is concerned. As I said before, this is not meant to be an exhaustive explanation of my reasons for rejecting Sedevacantism. I am very aware that many Sedevacantists will not be convinced or even swayed by my decision or my rationale. In fact, I am of the belief that Sedevacantism may always remain. No pope will satisfy them all, and time is of no significance. But my hope and prayer is that Sedevacantists will begin reconsidering themselves, their ideas, and their affiliations. To look in the mirror, recognize their own frailty, their own ignorance, and even incompetence. The truth is, one may be more Catholic than the Pope, but no one, absolutely no one, is more Catholic than Catholicism. It is what it is. We are who we are, and Christ will not forsake His church.